Hello, friends. Welcome back to Rhythms for the Road, Part 2. And in this video, we are going to talk about what rest actually is. And sorry about that. Little technical difficulties, take two. Welcome back. And if you were here for the first time, welcome. My name is Jen. I am a spiritual director. I am a creator, a community builder, and it is my joy to welcome you here and to have this conversation about rest with you. And would love to hear from those of you who were here last week live, or if you watched the replay, to hear about what stood out to you from our conversation last week. And would love to welcome our live friends. Welcome, Allison. Welcome, Alyssa. It is great to be with you this evening. Now, in this series, everything can be a conversation each week all by itself, but it does build on each other. But if you weren't here last week, I'm hopeful that you'll still get something out of our conversation as we go a little deeper. And as a recap, last week we talked about what happens when you never stop. And not even looking at burnout, but considering it as identity erosion. Because when we never pull over, we can lose the thread of who we are, apart from what we're making, apart from what we're producing. And we stopped and stepped back to consider what that pace is actually costing us. What our inability at times to step away causes us to think about who we are. Is it who we are in our role, or is it who we are in Christ? Our identity is loved. And curious if anything stayed with you from last week. You're welcome to drop it in the chat. If you're watching on the replay, please feel free to share a comment. And we're going to continue the conversation as what rest actually is. What rest actually is. And maybe you can relate to one of these scenarios. You took a day off and you came back more tired than you were before. Let me know if you've been there. Or maybe you went on a vacation, you traveled someplace, and then you felt like you needed a vacation from a vacation once you got back. Or maybe you took a whole day to sleep, you slept in on a Saturday, you rested throughout the day, but by Monday morning, it felt like it never happened. And in those scenarios, perhaps you thought that rest doesn't work for me. I'm wired differently. I'll rest when things settle down. Or I'm doing this wrong. I don't know what in the world rest looks like. And I want to suggest that the problem isn't you. And the problem isn't rest. The problem might be the definition of rest that you've been handed. And we've gotten many different definitions of rest. Maybe it's from the family you grew up in, or the jobs that you had, or the schools, or the coaches. And rest looked different in different spaces. And a lot of what our culture calls rest is actually a different form of consumption, right? Scrolling, watching a series, going out to eat, going shopping. And it's not that those things are evil in and of themselves. And there's a time and a place where all those things are okay in moderation, right? They're not bad, but they're also not rest. And when we do those things to escape and check out instead of resting, we sometimes feel depleted and we sometimes blame ourselves. So let me know if any of this is tracking with you. Alyssa shared that I put maximum effort into so much of everything that I really don't know how to do anything restfully. So appreciate your honesty, Alyssa. It is a very real thing because we go hard in so many areas of life. And now that I have a few minutes, what in the world do I do with that? My hope is that by the time we finish up our conversation, that there'll be some sort of frame of understanding for you to go a little deeper in rest, to consider it differently than just a day off or just a good night's sleep. And those are important and have their place. But it's knowing, okay, what do I need most right now? And so tonight we're going to take a few rest stops in our journey, all on the same road, but we're going to have a conversation about what that looks like. Now, have you been in circles where the lesson or what is being communicated or the assumption is that rest is the complete opposite of work? Or that, oh, okay, if I work hard, work hard, work hard, um, and then accomplish something, I can finally rest, right? Rest is my reward. Or work hard, work hard, work hard, and then crash, and then get back up and go back at it in the same way. If I can earn it, then I can have rest. And that is actually not a biblical picture of what rest is. If you look in Genesis 2, in the creation story, God rested on the seventh day, and he rested as God. He modeled this before the fall, before there was a curse, before the exhaustion that we experience had started to kick in. And rest was modeled not as a recovery plan for when you crash, but it was built into the original rhythm. And that means that rest is not something that we should look at like we'll get to it eventually. It was always intended to be something to return to regularly. Now, before I jump in further, I want to ask, what do you feel when you hear the word rest? Maybe it is relief. Oh, like I finally get to rest. Or maybe it's a longing. Like I don't know how to rest, but I really want to. Maybe it's guilt. Like I can't step away from all the things that I know that I need to get done. So what comes to mind? What are the feelings that you think about, the thoughts when rest comes about? Now, I shared when I introduced myself that I'm spiritual director. I have an online community. I went back to school and got a doctorate in spiritual direction and formation. But what prompted all of these amazing experiences was that I deal with chronic fatigue and other health challenges. And so I couldn't do hustle culture even if I wanted to. I physically cannot. And I had to stop and learn what rest meant because my body wouldn't let me fake it anymore or go, and then crash. And that was a forced education before, I stepped into the halls of a school for my doctorate. It was the education of encountering Jesus and the rest for our souls that he talks about. And so I want to now enter into our couple of rest stops that we have. And stop one is rest as trust. Rest as trust. Is rest something that is synonymous with trust? Now, in Exodus 16, and I'll include some of these references so that you can go back and check them out on your own. But Exodus 16 is when God was providing manna in the wilderness for the Israelites as they were journeying to the promised land. He was literally raining down bread from heaven, just enough for what they would need, just enough for that next day, not anything extra. And God was teaching the Israelite people to trust him, that he is going to provide, that they don't need to gather more than they need. They don't have to try and secure tomorrow before rest comes. And then there was one day where they were able to gather double the amount for the next day, because the next day was a day of Sabbath rest. But any other day, if they attempted to gather more than they needed, it went bad. It stunk. And for those of us who are leaders, and particularly those of us who are community builders, entrepreneurs, content creators, especially when livelihood is involved, that reality of just enough, it hits differently, because a lot of the fear that sometimes can creep in is that if I stop, something is going to fall to the wayside and slip through the cracks, because my inbox isn't going to empty itself. My content isn't going to create itself. My community is not going to tend to itself. So there's this sense of like, I can't stop. And yet when we look at rest as trust, as this practice of actually believing and not just saying that I trust in God, and believing that the world doesn't depend on me, that it can keep moving even if I stop for a moment, and trusting that God was at work before we woke up. He is going to be at work after we stop and go to sleep. And we can know that in our heads, but sometimes it's the hardest thing to believe and practice. And I can't help but wonder, going back to the picture of Exodus 16, what is it that takes place when we begin to grab more than we're called to in a particular day? Is it that it was a successful day, that it was prosperous? Perhaps. But is it an effort out of striving versus trust? And could it be that what we gathered for the day, what we produced for the day, can actually become a stench, and it could be something that goes bad? And I don't have the answer for that, but it's just a question to consider in those moments where sometimes we can get into striving mode. And listen, I haven't arrived. This is something that I'm learning constantly to practice and to implement. Am I striving or am I trusting? Now, on a scale of 1 to 10, how much do you actually believe that things will be okay if you stop? Think of 1 is not at all, everything is going to fall apart, and 5 is I wholeheartedly 100% trust God with this. And all you have to do is put a number, and there's no judgment, because I think more often than not, it's easy for us to really struggle with this if we're honest as human beings. And it's learning that rest is trust. And it's not a feeling that we conjure up and manufacture. It's this practice that we grow into, a practice of trust. So think about that. Think about that not just today, but tomorrow, the next day, when you just have to do that one more thing. Is it that you're trusting, Is it that you're hoarding and striving? And only you know. That's between you and God. I appreciate you mentioning this, Alyssa. I think it's measuring success and what that scale looks like. And that's a great point. That is a great point because we measure everything else, and everything else is on this merit and earning scale. And so sometimes it's like, what does this look like? And that is something that really comes down to our relationship with Jesus, to discernment, to trusting the Holy Spirit, because there will be days that we're called to work more. There will be days where maybe we feel like we have more in us and we just know, okay, I need to stop. I need to stop and step back for a moment. And at the end of the day, anything that I talk about in this regard, I always encourage you to, number one, go back to Jesus, talk to him about it. What does this look like in your life? Because seasons change. What does this look like according to what I feel like God is leading me to do and to be? So consider, what is rest as trust? Because at the end of the day, this is between you and Jesus. So stop one, rest as trust. Stop two, rest as renewal. Rest as renewal. And here's a verse that you may be familiar with, and I encourage you to jot down the reference. Isaiah 40:29-31 says, he gives strength to the weary and increases the power of the weak. Even youth grow tired and weary, and young men stumble and fall. But those who hope in the Lord will renew their strength. They will soar on wings like eagles. They will run and not grow weary. They will walk and not faint. Rest that is renewing isn't an escape. It is an escape from life, and it is presence with the one who sustains our life. And so there's a difference between zoning out and actually being restored. And like I talked about earlier, a lot of what we do and call rest when we're tired is actually escape. It's actually consuming. And I'm guilty of this, right? When a show turns into like the entire series or a couple minutes on social media turns into like way longer, or, extra snacks or whatever that looks like. It's our way of saying like, I'm going to check out and I'm going to escape. And the thing is that sometimes we feel worse afterwards. And renewal happens differently, right? It's not running away from everything, but it's running toward someone. It's running toward the Lord. And so it's not passive. It is this active trust and active hope. And even though we may feel like it is going to take weeks for me to recover, I need to go away on vacation and sit on an island to be renewed, which is not a reality for most of us. Rest can actually happen in these small increments. I appreciate you sharing this, Alyssa, as someone who has chronic illness and literally has been forced to put everything down to rest and trust. And it really comes down to trust, which is not easy. It's so much easier to say it on a live stream for me than to put it into practice. And yet I'm constantly reminded, often through the physical, limitations sometimes that I experience, it's a reminder to me to trust. So think about rest not as like I need to get away to, I need to go to the Caribbean for 3 weeks, which would be awesome, but rest happening in small increments. So think about an intentional walk where you're actually paying attention, or taking 10 minutes of silence that isn't filled with a podcast? What about stepping back and reading scripture slowly? Not to check off my Bible reading for the day, not for content, but to just slowly receive the gift of God's word. Maybe it's sitting in your backyard for a couple moments and noticing creation, noticing what God made. And none of those things are complicated, but it does require us being intentional, and it requires us believing that our being with God is actually, he's doing something, even if it doesn't feel productive. And it's kind of like when people talk about going to the gym. A lot of times, and I can't speak as someone who does that from experience, but I I don't know many people who maybe they don't want to go to the gym that day, but they regret it afterwards. And sometimes you do things, right? As just, I know I need to do this. This is the right thing. And that goes for when we are making these intentional steps in just little ways, in just little ways. So number 3 is rest as resistance. Rest as resistance. What does that mean? Well, in the 10 Commandments, we read about the Sabbath command. And it was included in Exodus and also here in Deuteronomy. And we have how Sabbath was grounded in the creation story by God. He rested, and so we rest. But they needed a reminder, especially because of their background. You have a group of people who were enslaved in Egypt who had to produce constantly 7 days a week. And so to just all of a sudden take a full 24 hours off for rest, I can only imagine how hard that must have been. But in that command, Sabbath rest is done unto the Lord. And so every time we rest, we're making this declaration. We're declaring that God is in control. And we're saying, like, look, my worth isn't what I do and my output. It's not in productivity. And there's a place for all of those things, right? They're not bad. But is that where our identity lies? Is that where our trust lies? And we're not machines. And like we talked about last week, if we're not careful, if our identity gets tied to what we do, it could end up spiraling. And in a culture that is very much measured by growth metrics, like you were saying, Alyssa, like what does that mean? What is measurable? And in many cases, right, especially as an online creator or digital entrepreneur, right, there's looking at growth metrics, consistency, what is your engagement rate, what are all these numbers? And again, important, but not at the expense as our trust in God, as our being renewed, and as our being able to make this countercultural act where we are choosing to trust God, we're choosing to be renewed, and we're refusing to let this pace of the world define us. And so it means pushing back on a regular, consistent basis against this lie that we have to earn our rest. And here's a very practical example. If you are a YouTuber and you're looking to grow on YouTube, consistency is gigantic, right? Keeping in rhythm with the algorithm is so important, right? I have to always post. I have to always show up. And there's always something more I can do to be able to grow a channel. Or for those of us who run a community, an online community, We have to be present. We have to always post. We have to show up. And it's important for us to be faithful, to steward what the Lord has entrusted to us. And we also need to resist striving and hustle culture and make a countercultural decision to step away, even if we struggle to do so, but doing it in a way that honors God and trusts that He is renewing us in the process. So we looked, rest is trust, rest as renewal, and rest as resistance. And I'm curious, as we're chatting about this, which of these three words stands out to you? Which lands for you? And think about which word you feel the most drawn to. You know, there's often an anxiety that we carry when we don't trust that we need to stop, or depletion in a way that maybe our escapes haven't fixed, they haven't renewed us, or are fighting the belief that my worth is in what I do. Like you said here, Alyssa, learning to say different things about myself instead of just my job. So we have renewal, we have resistance, and all of these areas are real. And they're all things that we can address with the Lord. And I want to encourage you this week to practice rest through that particular lens. I'm not saying go and do a full overhaul of 24-hour Sabbath to redo all of your systems. When you take a moment to rest, even if in that small way where it's, I'm going to sit in the backyard for a few minutes and just contemplate God's goodness or look at His creation, when maybe it's taking that walk or having those moments in silence. When you have those opportunities, I encourage you to name it, saying, God, I'm trusting you. This is my trust, or this is renewal, or this is resistance. And as you do so, I challenge you, see what that does. See that how that impacts the quality of your rest, the quality of even how you enter in, because naming does change things. We talked about that last week, and it applies here too. And so as you consider rest, as you consider a few moments that you have in the pockets of your day, is this trust? Is this renewal? Is this resistance? Is it all the above? And it's important for us to actually think about that next step. And we can walk away from a live stream and say, okay, well, this helped me to look at things differently, but what am I actually supposed to do, right? We mentioned that at the beginning. When we have those moments, how do I actually step back and rest in the quiet? Because maybe there's no sound going on around me, there's no noise, but inside there's so much going on that is not quiet. And even in those moments where we don't know what to do, when we have these moments for rest and our minds are going a mile a minute, which I get, that's been the case in my life. Consider how this can be slowly integrated in these small ways into your everyday life, and give yourself grace. Give yourself grace as you take these steps of faith, these steps of trust, these steps to be renewed, going towards God rather than running away from our circumstances, and then choosing to resist the pace of the world, even if it's just with 2 minutes of your day. And in my journey, I I I learned, like, I need to do this in a realistic way because we're not all gonna go away to the Bahamas, right? We might have 2 minutes until we're on to the next thing because many of us live very full lives. And that led me over the years to, create a small PDF that I would like to share with you, where it's these small mini micro practices when you know that you need to stop, but you don't know what to do with the silence. And so in the description of the video, there's a link for you to check out this free PDF guide with sacred pauses. And it's also here in the QR code on the screen if you're watching on TV. But I encourage you to grab the free guide um, and use it. Take a moment and implement one of the practices in your day. Think about how you can step back. Each of these practices, these micro practices, can be within 2 to 3 minutes of your day. And there's something really powerful and amazing when we say, I have 2 minutes. God, I'm going to give you my 2 minutes and what he can do in 2 minutes. And he meets us. He meets us exactly where we are. And he knows our needs. He knows what's difficult for us. And there's grace. There's grace. So next week, we're going to talk a little bit more about this, about maybe the kind of rest that you might be missing, the kind of rest that might be helpful for you. But learning, all of us, learning to incorporate rest, not as something that, okay, I'm going to get to this eventually, but recognizing rest as a gift from God and something that we can practice now, not just like once a quarter, but something that we could implement into our lives daily in these small micro practices ways, and also weekly. And we'll talk a little bit more about that next week. So, how are you guys feeling? How are you feeling about rest? How are you feeling about trust, renewal, resistance? Rest is possible. It's hard, but it's not something that is impossible. It's something that God gives us the grace to do because he's modeled for us how to do it. So I hope we'll see each other next week. I am so grateful that you stopped by, and we'll be back next Monday as we go into part 3 of our 5-part series of Rhythms for the Road. Have a wonderful evening. We'll catch up soon.